I tell you what, whom I have to thank a little bit for this is in a funny, not someone I've ever met, and I'd love to meet him, but I bet I never will, is Aaron Sorkin. I was watching, he did this masterclass on storytelling, and I really read a few books on storytelling, and then I watched this, and it occurred to me, I thought, you've got to make sure you never give away what's going to happen before it happens. So I did spend a lot of time thinking about how to pace the book and making sure that it was
Well,
compelling as a story.
that's the impression you get because you're reading the book and you just want to know what bloody well happens to the next. Are they go? It's an escape story. It's at some level, and will they get out? How will they get free? And you have two parts of the family on both sides of this war, both struggling to find their way to become real again, to come back to normality.
I've taken you to the point where they're in Anders's army, but even at that point, they're still not safe. It may be worthwhile going back to my mum.
And then they get to Iran, right? That's where they finally find refuge.
Yeah.
And this is the other strange thing. All these countries, and if you want to understand why the Poles are so upset about Ukraine right now, read this book. The presence of the Russians constantly massacring, destroying, threatening the Poles, and the use of Ukraine and all of that is absolutely not that long ago.
It really isn't. And one of the early things in the book is my grandmother Lucia snuggling up in bed overnight when they're under attack from the Russians in the First World War, and then they flee to Vienna. So fleeing from the Russians has been a kind of theme of my family's life. But I wonder whether it wouldn't be, because we kind of leave my
yes, we've left your mom. We've left her for a little bit. Let's go back to Holland briefly, where they are, not far away from Anne Frank, actually.
So I've always thought, people describe Anne Frank as a little Dutch girl. And I thought of my mother like that. But of course, I realized Anne Frank was a little German girl who happened to live in Holland because the Franks were refugees. And the Franks were part of a liberal Jewish group of refugees living in a part of Amsterdam, which my family was part of as well. And my mother and her sisters, they knew Anne and Margot. Ruth, my aunt in particular, knew Margot, and people always asked, of course, both of them for the rest of their life, what was Anne Frank like and all that. And Ruth used to always go, well, I don't want to disappoint you, but she was like just a girl in the class, right? And that incident in which Justin Bieber went to Anne Frank's house, at the Anne Frank house, and he put in the book, Anne was a great girl. I hope she would have been a believer. Right? And this was regarded as like unbelievably crass. How could somebody say something like that? So I read it in the paper, and I happened to be, at my mum's house, as I often was, and I said, Mum, he's done said this, and I had to explain who Justin Bieber was. And then Mum said, yeah, I think she would have been. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, well, we all think of Anne and Margot Frank as these famous, iconic figures. But she was just a girl, and that's the whole point about her. The whole point about Anne Frank is she was just not the sparkling brilliance of the diary, which Ruth said blew her away. She had no idea that was all in there. It was something else. It was just the sort of ordinariness of it. And Ruth and Anne shared some of the same friends. Some of Ruth's autograph books signed by some of the kids that also turn up, are mentioned in the diaries. And they all lived this similar, perfectly ordinary life. And after the war, in fact, Otto and Alfred were friendly. There's a lot of correspondence between them.